It was October 24th, 1944, a night thick with the scent of diesel and salt. Somewhere in the black waters of the Formosa Strait, the American submarine USS Tang slid silently beneath the surface, her hull humming with quiet confidence. The war in the Pacific was at its height, and the Tang was one of the Navy's deadliest hunters. A steel predator commanded by a man whose name had already become a whispered legend among submariners, Commander Richard "Dick" O'Kane. Inside the control room, the air was warm, cramped, and heavy with anticipation. Red lights glowed dimly against sweating faces as the sonar pinged softly, a heartbeat in metal form. The Tang had already written her name in blood and steel. In just 1 year of service, she had sunk more enemy tonnage than any other U.S. submarine. But tonight, she was chasing one more victory, a Japanese convoy moving through the strait under cover of darkness. The crew, 70 men, each trained to perfection, knew the drill. The torpedo gang in the forward room loaded the last of the Mark 18 electric torpedoes, checking their gyro settings by feel more than sight. O'Kane's voice came steady over the intercom. "Stand by. Forward tubes 1 through 4. Let's make this one count, boys." It was said O'Kane never raised his voice in battle. His calm was contagious, the kind that turned fear into focus. From the periscope, faint silhouettes took shape against the horizon. Dark cargo ships guarded by destroyers, moving in a zigzag pattern. O'Kane's first officer, Lieutenant Commander Edward Dempsey, glanced at the clock. Convoy speed, 8 knots. Range, 3,000 yards. O'Kane adjusted the periscope's crosshairs and gave a small nod. "We'll close the gap to 1,500. Prepare to fire." The engines thrummed low as the Tang crept forward, a silent beast stalking its prey. On the surface, the night was deceptively calm, stars scattered across an indifferent sky, the sea whispering against the periscope lens. But below, men held their breath as the captain gave the word. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. A series of muffled whooshes echoed through the steel hull. Seconds stretched into eternities. Then, distant explosions rolled through the water, one after another, a deep, satisfying thud that made the entire vessel tremble. "Direct hits," shouted Dempsey. The crew broke into restrained cheers. Discipline still ruled the boat, but smiles flashed in the red light. Through the periscope, O'Kane watched flames licking up the side of a Japanese freighter, her deck erupting in chaos. He marked the kill calmly in his logbook. 2 ships sunk, 1 burning. But victory at sea was a treacherous thing. The Tang was now dangerously close to the convoy, and the escorts were already sweeping the area, dropping depth charges that boomed like underwater thunder. The submarine dove deep, 150 feet, 200, 300. Bulkheads groaned under the pressure, gauges quivered. Each man listened to the hull's whisper, a song of steel against the crushing weight of the Pacific. They stayed down for hours, silent and patient, until the explosions faded into the distance. Then, slowly, they rose again toward the surface. It was just after midnight when they prepared to launch their final torpedo, their last shot of the patrol. O'Kane, leaning over the attack scope, studied the lone burning freighter still afloat. The decision was simple. "Let's finish her," he said quietly. In the forward room, the crew loaded tube number 10, the last torpedo aboard. It was a Mark 18, a new model known for its speed and stealth, but also for being temperamental. Some crews distrusted it. O'Kane had learned to respect its unpredictability but trusted his men's precision. The target was 1,800 yards away. At 1:42 a.m., O'Kane gave the final order. Fire 10. The sound was almost anticlimactic. A single whoomp as compressed air expelled the weapon into the dark. Men exhaled. Someone muttered, "That's all she wrote." But then came the sound no submariner ever wanted to hear. A faint metallic echo, wrong in tone and rhythm. The sonar operator's eyes widened. "Sir, that torpedo's running hot, straight, and normal, but—" He hesitated. "It's circling back." Silence fell over the control room. O'Kane's head snapped toward the chart table. "Say again." "Running in a circle, Captain." "It's coming around." Panic flashed across hardened faces. In the cramped control room, men scrambled for stations. The helm spun. Hard right rudder. But the Tang was slow to respond, her engines laboring. Through the periscope, O'Kane saw nothing but blackness. Then the sonar operator's voice cracked like a whip. "Impact bearing 015, closing fast." There was no time. A blinding flash ripped through the submarine's aft section. The detonation rocked the Tang like a rag doll. Lights blew out, metal screamed, men were thrown from their posts. A cloud of smoke and seawater burst through the compartments as the submarine lurched violently. O'Kane was thrown against the periscope housing. When he rose, dazed and bleeding, the forward section was already flooding. Someone shouted, "We're hit in the stern!" Another screamed, "Fire in the engine room!" The Tang's own torpedo, its final shot, had turned back like a cursed boomerang and struck her directly amidships. Water poured in, unstoppable. The crew fought to seal bulkheads, but the sea was faster. The submarine listed sharply, groaning as compartments filled. In the forward room, men hammered at jammed hatches, their faces pale in the flickering emergency lights. O'Kane gave the order no captain ever wants to give: abandon ship. But it was too late for most. The Tang sank within minutes, swallowed by the same black water she had ruled for months. Of 70 men, only 9 would ever see the surface again. As the submarine slipped into the abyss, the last thing O'Kane saw was the red glow of the instrument panel fading beneath the rising flood, like the dying heart of a beast that had destroyed itself. The explosion that tore through the Tang was not a single event, but a sequence of small deaths. Compartments imploding, cables snapping, the heavy steel hull folding under pressure like a wounded creature. In the first seconds after impact, the submarine tilted violently, her bow lifting, her stern dragging downward as seawater rushed through the shattered aft torpedo room. Inside the control room, men clawed their way up the sloping deck, slipping on oil and seawater. Someone shouted, "Batteries flooding," and another voice answered, "She's going down." Then came a groan so deep it vibrated through their bones, the sound of the submarine giving into the sea. Darkness swallowed the boat. The red emergency lamps flickered and died. For the first time since commissioning, the USS Tang, pride of the Pacific, was blind and powerless. Commander Richard O'Kane, bruised and bleeding from the blast, found himself pressed against the periscope column, his ears ringing. He called out for reports, but the only reply was coughing and the frantic sloshing of water. The bow was still intact. For now. Somewhere behind him, men were screaming for help through a jammed hatch. He knew what that meant. Those in the aft compartments were already beyond reach. "Seal the engine room," he ordered, though he knew it was futile. The boat was dying faster than they could move. The Tang hit the seabed nose first with a dull, crushing impact that knocked men off their feet. Depth gauges froze at 180 feet, shallow compared to most submarine graves, but deep enough to make escape nearly impossible. The sudden stillness that followed was almost unbearable. In the forward torpedo room, a dozen survivors stared into the darkness, breathing hard, every exhale sounding too loud. They could feel the weight of the Pacific pressing on the hull. The steel groaned like an old ship sighing in pain. Someone whispered, "Is anyone alive aft?" No one answered. The air grew thick with diesel fumes and fear. Flashlights flickered as they checked the pressure hull for leaks. Against all odds, the forward compartments were dry. A small miracle. The shock had jammed the forward hatch shut, trapping them in what was now both a refuge and a coffin. Chief Torpedoman Bill Leibold, face blackened with soot, turned to the captain. "Sir, the batteries are flooded. We've got chlorine gas coming soon." O'Kane nodded grimly. Every submariner knew that once seawater mixed with battery acid, it created a cloud of poisonous chlorine gas. It was colorless, odorless death. "Get everyone to the torpedo room. Seal the bulkhead." They obeyed without hesitation. Men moved by instinct now, trained reflexes overriding panic. In the dim light, O'Kane's face looked carved from iron. He was calm, even as the hull creaked ominously. That composure gave his men something to hold on to in the chaos. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The air was hot and heavy. Condensation ran down the steel walls like sweat. The submarine was silent except for the occasional ping of debris striking the hull, echoes from the world above. O'Kane spoke softly, more to keep his crew grounded than to give orders. "We'll wait until the pressure equalizes. Then we use the escape trunk." The men knew what that meant, a free ascent from nearly 200 feet. No rescue gear, no guarantee. Just lungs full of stale air and the will to live. The submarine carried only one Momsen lung, a crude breathing device that allowed for controlled ascent. It was meant for drills, never for a real catastrophe. Now, it was their only hope. They would have to share it, one by one, rising through black water that could crush them or send them rocketing to the surface too fast to survive. O'Kane looked at each man, oil-streaked faces lit by a dying flashlight, and made the decision no one else wanted to voice. "We'll go in pairs." Volunteers first silence. Then, slowly, a hand rose. It was Radioman Floyd Caverly, his lips trembling but his eyes steady. "I'll go, sir." He was followed by Leibold. The two prepared the escape trunk, cranking open valves by hand until seawater began filling the small chamber. The others watched in absolute stillness. When the pressure equalized, the outer hatch groaned open. "Good luck," someone whispered. The last thing they saw was the faint shimmer of their flashlight reflecting off the rising water. Then the hatch closed, and they were gone. For endless minutes, nothing. Then a dull clang. The hatch resealing. The next pair stepped forward. Hours passed in that timeless darkness. One after another, they climbed into the escape chamber and disappeared. Some made it. Others never resurfaced. The men left behind could only listen to the silence that followed each attempt. By dawn, only a handful remained, including O'Kane himself. The air had grown thin, making every breath an effort. He pressed his hand against the bulkhead. It was warm, vibrating faintly. The sea was still shifting outside, as if restless. "Captain," whispered Leibold, his voice hoarse. "We can't wait any longer." O'Kane nodded. "All right. Let's go." He was the last to enter the escape trunk. As the water rose around him, he felt the submarine's hull against his shoulder, cold and final. He thought of his men, the patrols, the laughter in the mess room, the victories they'd shared. He thought of how the sea gave and took in equal measure. Then the pressure equalized, and he pushed upward. The ascent was agony, darkness pressing from all sides, lungs burning, ears screaming. Then, suddenly, light, faint at first, then growing brighter. O'Kane broke the surface, gasping for air. Around him, a few other heads bobbed in the waves, the survivors. Behind them, the sea was calm again. No trace of the submarine that had once ruled it. They had escaped death, only to find themselves adrift in enemy waters. When Commander Richard O'Kane broke through the surface of the Pacific, the world around him was eerily calm, too calm for what had just happened beneath. The moon hung low, painting the sea in silver, and in that dim light, the few survivors of the USS Tang clung to life in the cold darkness, a handful of men adrift in enemy waters, surrounded by oil, debris, and silence. The explosion had come and gone like lightning, but the ocean remembered. The wreck of the submarine lay beneath them, 180 feet below, broken open, entombing more than 60 sailors who would never rise again. O'Kane floated on his back, gulping the night air. His body ached from the blast. His face was streaked with diesel and blood. He turned slowly, scanning the water. Somewhere nearby, faint voices called out, hoarse, desperate, human. "Over here!" "This way." It was Chief Leibold's voice. O'Kane paddled toward it, his movements heavy and slow. The sea around them was slick with oil, stinging their eyes and skin. When he reached the group, he found 8 men, all clinging to a single life ring, their only support in the endless ocean. They were silent for a long moment, just breathing. Each man knew the others had seen what no sailor should ever see: their own ship destroy itself. "Anyone else make it out?" O'Kane asked quietly. Leibold shook his head. "Not that we saw, sir." There was no time for grief. They were in enemy waters, just miles off the coast of Formosa, now Taiwan. Every sound could bring danger: Japanese patrol boats, aircraft, or the unthinkable, the same convoy they had attacked. And then they heard it. Engines, faint at first, then clearer. The rhythmic hum of diesel destroyers sweeping the area, hunting for the submarine that had just sunk their ships. The men froze. No one dared to move or speak. Even the sound of waves against their bodies felt too loud. Minutes turned into hours. The noise of the engines came closer, then faded, then returned again. Searchlights swept the waves, distant cones of light cutting through the dark like swords. The men ducked instinctively each time one passed near them. O'Kane's mind raced. He had been in the water for hours, yet his instinct for command hadn't faded. He whispered to Leibold, "If we're captured, give them nothing. Name, rank, serial number only. No talk about the Tang or our patrol." Leibold nodded, his teeth chattering. "Aye, sir." The temperature dropped. The night air sliced through their wet clothes like knives. They huddled together for warmth, taking turns holding onto the life ring. Salt water burned their throats and eyes. The stench of oil and blood was suffocating. Every few minutes, someone whispered, "Stay awake." Falling asleep meant slipping under, and under meant death. As dawn approached, the first light revealed the devastation around them: shattered planks, life jackets, and a thin rainbow sheen of oil stretching across the surface. The men could now see each other's faces clearly for the first time. Pale, hollow-eyed, sunken with exhaustion. And then, through the pale light of morning, came a sound none of them expected. The churning of a motor, close this time, too close. A Japanese escort ship was approaching. O'Kane looked up, blinking through salt water. A dark silhouette loomed over them, a patrol craft, slowly circling. Its hull bore the rising sun insignia, bright and terrible. They had been found. "Hold still," whispered Leibold, but it was useless. The ship had already seen them. A voice barked from above in Japanese, followed by the splash of a rope ladder. Armed sailors peered over the side, shouting orders. There was no point in resisting. They were unarmed, half dead from exposure. One by one, the survivors were hauled aboard. As their feet touched the deck, they were met with rifle butts, kicks, and shouts. The Japanese crew, furious over the loss of their ships, showed no mercy. O'Kane stumbled to his knees, blood dripping from a cut above his eyebrow. He met the eyes of the officer in charge, a young lieutenant with a pistol at his side. The man said something sharp, then struck O'Kane across the face. No translator was needed. The message was clear: "You killed our men." The 9 survivors were tied, beaten, and thrown into the ship's storage compartment. In the dim, foul-smelling space, they sat in silence, their wrists bound, their futures uncertain. O'Kane tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. "We stay alive. That's the mission now." The others nodded. Even in captivity, the captain's authority held. As the patrol boat turned toward shore, the survivors of the Tang, the most successful American submarine of World War II, stared through the cracks in the wood at the endless, indifferent sea. They had outlived the explosion, escaped the depths, and now faced something far colder than the ocean: the long, merciless hand of war. The journey to shore took hours, endless, gray hours under a sun that felt like punishment. The 9 survivors of the USS Tang sat bound and silent on the deck of the Japanese escort ship, their faces swollen from salt and blows. Every few minutes, a crewman would pass by and strike one of them, not out of discipline but anger, the kind that burns hotter than logic. They were prisoners, but worse, they were symbols. The Tang had sunk more Japanese ships than any other submarine in the Pacific. To their captors, these men were not soldiers. They were executioners. When the ship docked at Takao Harbor in Formosa, a crowd had gathered. Civilians, dock workers, and naval personnel all came to see the captured Americans, the ghosts who had haunted their convoys. The air smelled of oil, fish, and hostility. As the prisoners were marched through the port, heads bowed, the crowd shouted curses and threw stones. Someone spat at O'Kane. Another threw a rotten piece of fruit that struck Leibold on the shoulder. The guards did nothing to stop it. At the military base, they were separated, interrogated, and beaten. Questions came rapid fire, shouted in Japanese, translated poorly, demanded violently. "Name, rank, ship name. What route did you take?" O'Kane repeated the only answer he was allowed to give. "Richard O'Kane, Commander, United States Navy." Each time, the interrogator slammed a fist into the table or a rifle butt into his ribs. They didn't believe him. They wanted details, positions, tactics, intelligence. But O'Kane refused. After days of interrogation, they were transported to the mainland, Japan. Crammed into the hold of a small freighter with no light or ventilation, they endured heat, thirst, and the reek of their own wounds. When the hatch opened days later, The air felt almost solid with cold. They were taken to Ofuna, a secret Japanese naval interrogation camp near Yokohama. Ofuna was not officially recognized as a prisoner of war camp. It didn't exist on paper, and that made it far worse. There were no Red Cross visits, no medical inspections, no letters home. Only silence. The guards called it the place where men disappear. Inside, the captives were stripped, deloused, and thrown into small, windowless cells. They slept on straw mats, ate rice mixed with sand, and were forbidden to speak. Anyone caught whispering was beaten. O'Kane spent weeks in isolation. Sometimes, he could hear screams echoing down the corridor, other prisoners being interrogated. At night, the guards forced them to kneel for hours under a single dim bulb, the silence broken only by the sound of their own breathing. When the guards realized who he was, the captain of the Tang, the submarine that had sunk their supply convoys, the beatings became personal. They wanted humiliation as much as information. One officer told him through a translator, "You kill many Japanese. You are cursed by the sea. Even your own torpedo hate you." The words struck deep. It was true. The sea had claimed his ship, not the enemy. And yet, O'Kane refused to let shame replace duty. He told himself that survival was still service, that living to tell the story was the only act of defiance left. Months passed. The prisoners grew thin, hollow-eyed, and silent. They communicated in whispers, taps, and glances. The smallest kindness, a shared grain of rice, a nod, became a form of resistance. Outside, the war turned. American bombers began striking Japan. The prisoners could hear distant rumbling at night, explosions echoing across Yokohama Bay. Hope, faint but real, returned. By the summer of 1945, the guards' confidence began to crumble. Rumors reached the camp. Words like Hiroshima and Nagasaki whispered among captives and captors alike. Then, one morning, the beatings stopped. The guards grew quiet, uneasy. A week later, the prisoners were told to line up in the yard. A Japanese officer read a statement in trembling English. "The war is finished." For a long time, no one moved. The meaning of the words didn't sink in immediately. Then, slowly, the reality unfolded. They had survived. On August 29, 1945, Commander O'Kane and the remaining survivors of the USS Tang were liberated by American forces. When they were led out of the camp, O'Kane's uniform hung from his shoulders like a ghost of its former self. He weighed barely 100 pounds, but his eyes were sharp, alive. Reporters later asked him what he remembered most about that moment. He said quietly, "The sound of the ocean. I could hear it again. And for the first time, it didn't sound angry." After the war, O'Kane received the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross, and several other decorations. But he rarely spoke of the Tang. When he did, his words were simple. She was the finest submarine that ever lived, and she died as she lived. Fighting out of 70 men, only 9 survived. The USS Tang remains on the seabed near Formosa, a steel tomb sealed by time. A reminder that in war, even perfection can destroy itself. And as the waves pass endlessly over her resting place, the ocean keeps its silence. When Commander Richard O'Kane returned to the United States in late 1945, he was greeted as a hero. But in his heart, the sea had not let him go. Reporters surrounded him, admirals shook his hand, and newspapers called him the Miracle Captain. Yet every night, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear it. The faint hiss, the split-second whistle, and the explosion that had ripped his submarine apart. He knew what everyone wanted to ask, but no one dared. How does a submarine sink itself? In December 1945, a full Naval Board of Inquiry convened in Washington, D.C. to answer that question. The investigation into the USS Tang was one of the most thorough of the entire war, not out of blame, but out of disbelief. The Tang had been the Navy's most successful submarine, sinking over 33 Japanese vessels in 5 patrols. Its loss was more than tragedy. It was mystery. The findings through survivor testimony and engineering analysis, investigators reconstructed the final moments. On October 25, 1944, in the Taiwan Strait, the Tang had attacked a Japanese convoy at night, firing all but one of her torpedoes. Each hit its mark. The final torpedo, number 24, was loaded and fired at a retreating freighter. Seconds later, it curved sharply to the left. Instead of running straight, it looped back, an impossible maneuver, and struck the submarine that had launched it. The weapon was a Mark 18 electric torpedo, the U.S. Navy's first attempt to copy captured German G7E technology. It ran silently, without a telltale wake, making it deadly to the enemy, but equally dangerous to its own crew. Post-war analysis revealed that the gyro mechanism, responsible for stabilizing the torpedo's course, had failed. A single corroded wire, combined with a magnetic trigger malfunction, caused the weapon to turn 180 degrees after launch. In other words, the Tang was destroyed by its own success, a flaw in the weapon it trusted most. The Navy quietly revised its torpedo systems after that. New gyros, new safety locks, and remote disabling features were developed, all born from the disaster that claimed the Tang. But for O'Kane, those technical corrections did nothing to erase the human cost. He had commanded perfectly. His men had fought perfectly. And yet, a single miswired circuit had undone them all. In his personal notes, O'Kane wrote, "There is no such thing as invincibility at sea. The ocean humbles everything that floats upon it, legacy and memory." In 1946, the remains of the Tang's crew were declared lost at sea. A bronze plaque was placed in the U.S. Navy Memorial, inscribed with 70 names and one line beneath them. They gave their lives that others might live free. Decades later, in 1972, O'Kane, then retired, visited Pearl Harbor submarine base. He stood at the docks where the Tang had once sailed out. The new submarines around him were sleek, nuclear-powered, built of alloys that could dive to unimaginable depths. Yet, he said quietly to a young officer beside him, "All this, every improvement, began with one mistake that killed my ship." The officer nodded, not sure what to say. O'Kane passed away in 1994, buried with full honors in Arlington National Cemetery. To this day, the USS Tang remains 180 feet beneath the waters of the Taiwan Strait, its hull buried in sand, its periscope still upright, like a silent salute to those who never came home. Divers have never reached it, currents there are treacherous, and the site is treated as a war grave. But sonar scans confirm what survivors always said. The bow is intact, facing upward, as if still trying to rise. Epilogue. In the years since, historians have come to see the Tang not just as a tragedy, but as a turning point. The moment when technology and courage collided in the unforgiving logic of war. Her story became required reading in U.S. naval training schools, not for its victories, but for its ending, because it taught something no textbook could. that war at sea is not just a contest of steel and firepower. It's a negotiation with the elements, where even the smallest imperfection can decide between legend and loss. And somewhere in the depths of the Pacific, beneath a shroud of sand and silence, the Tang still waits, a monument to the men who fought the sea, and to the sea, which in the end always has the last word.